So our next speaker is Risteárd Ua Cróinín. So I've known Risteárd for quite a few years now, first meeting on the wet and rugged slopes of Slieve Cullen in West Clare through a field trip which I had arranged. So he is best known for his extensive knowledge of medieval buildings and his practical experience in surveying and restoring historical buildings. Risteárd has served for 20 years as County Archaeologist and Architectural Conservation Officer to the Clare County Council until his retirement in 2019, during which time he was instrumental in implementing heritage legislation in that county, among many other things. Risteárd was a founding member of the Association of Architectural Conservation Officers, in which he served twice as the chairperson for that. He has spent over 40 years in repairing and restoring late medieval tower houses and is a co-author of the Castles and Tower Houses of Clare, published by the National Monuments Service. Risteárd has published widely and lectured in numerous third-level colleges and universities on all aspects of Irish-built heritage. He has a particular interest in clan history, and upon completion of the restoration of Risteárd Ua Castle in 1990, he authored the book O'D, The Story of a Rebel Clan. He also has a great grasp for the Irish language and continues to lecture and publish on related subjects, including, but notwithstanding, historical building repairs, the place names of Ireland, and local history more generally. So, I think we all agree, Risteárd is a man of many talents, a true Ildonach. And I suppose we could call him a Fir Erenach, Fila Agustari, Siha Cliha, August Oroni, August Mohara Ma. So, without any further ado, I would like to invite Risteárd to the lectern, please.
Good morning, my Luke. It does just bawailam mo fear weeks ago. Luke McInerney, August Garrow de Kelly, a Hogan Kuradam, Charton Chanyo, August Lord Aranaver, Kudramak Shah, at Oasagror. I'd like to thank Luke and Garrod for the invitation to come and speak today. Nobody has showed me how to change slides. I presume I just press a button here somewhere. That one? Oh, that one? That one down there. Okay, yeah, excellent. Okay, now as Lucas said, it's very hard to follow an introduction like that. But as Lucas said, I've spent 40 years or more in the repair and conservation and restoration of medieval buildings, including tower houses, from North Donegal, Carrigabrahe to Clare and Limerick and Tipperary, but mostly in County Clare. The picture up in front of us here is my first connection with you might say, the clans of Ireland. This is Risteárd Ua Castle as it was in 1970. And I was asked by Mr. John O'Day of Wisconsin, who was the owner, to carry out some repairs. And after a year's work, I realized we were going absolutely nowhere, and it would take generations to repair this house. So I thought of another plan. I went back to John and I said to him, if you give us the tower house for 30 years at £1 a year, we'll restore it. And by us, I meant the local community in Dysart and Corofin. So he agreed to that. We formed committees, we got everyone on board, and we tore into the job. We also applied for planning permission, of course. And we started on St. Stephen's Day, 1986. And we opened the doors to the public in July 1987. After repairing the house and putting 2 stories onto the top of it, we had only 2 tradesmen. All the rest were volunteers. And we couldn't even afford scaffolding, so we worked from the inside out. And as I say, that was my first introduction to the O'Days and the O'Day clan. Now, they're represented here by Shane, who is the present Taoiseach or chieftain of the O'Days. While I was working on the tower house, I gathered notes about the history and all information I could about the O'Ds and their tower house. And I then wrote the book OD Story of a Rebel Clan, which ran to 2 printings. And then I decided to get people to visit their house, we'd set up the OD clan, which we did in 1990. And we had the first OD clan gathering. There was no internet at the time. We had to borrow telephone directories off all the various embassies around the world and write to people and put stamps on the letters and send them out. But we had 280 people at the first OD clan gathering. And we did it every 3 years since. After about 12 years, it burned me out. So I handed over to Shane's cousin, James O'D, who was living in Clontarf, and he ran it for another 6 events, I think, and burned him out. So it's up to Shane now and his friends to carry on as long as they can. But it's been very successful. It's been very successful. And as I say, there's nothing that any clan can't do. What you need is enthusiasm and as little knowledge as possible. But anyway, I'll move on from that. So that was our tower house in 1970. And this is our tower house in 1990. So as you can see, where the 2 windows are there in front, about 2/3 of the way up, we had to start there and we had to put 2 stories onto the top and then fit it out. And the building beside it is the banquet hall. And most tower houses had a banquet hall and a barn. A barn would be a high wall, about 22 to 25 feet high, running around the complex, taking in about half an acre. And various other buildings. You can't see it in the photograph there, but on the left-hand side is a very large, the remains of a very large house, which was originally the bakery. And all these were inside the barn. This is one of the happiest days. It was one of our clan gatherings. I think it probably 2018, maybe, or a bit earlier. And we have the OD flag flying above the house on top there. Now, the O'Days only built 4 tower houses, whereas a lot of the other clans were much wealthier. You had the O'Loughlin's with 17, the McMahons at 14, the O'Connors at about 20, the O'Briens, who were Kings of Thomond, had 47, and the McNamaras, who were their accountants, had 82, including Bunratty. There's just a drawing that I did one time of a tower house, and really a lot of people get frightened when they're thinking of repairing or restoring medieval buildings. It shouldn't frighten you. They're small houses. They're very tall, but they're very small. And basically, the plan of a tower house is not greater than a lot of people's sitting room at home, and that's what you're roofing. And you will get ridiculous quotes from builders. But really, to look into it, I remember at the time when I started the first contract of O'Day's house, and I costed the job, I went down to the nails, and I costed the job at 39,000 to restore the house. Now, we restored it, we fitted it out with the furniture for 46,000. So we didn't go too far. Now, of course, you can't do that today, but you'd still repair a tower house. And of course, we use an awful lot of volunteers and voluntary work. You still restore a tower house for the same price as building your average modern bungalow. Drawings, of course, came into it a lot, and I always love drawings. And when you're showing the powers that be what you intend to do, they do expect you to draw a lot of things. I'm working through the slides here. I have no idea what's going to come up next. But anyway, yes. Now, of course, the first thing you need is money. You have to gather that from various people or groups or whatever. And the second thing you need is permission. And it can be a quagmire to go through the legislation, the Irish legislation. But I'll try and break it down as simply as I can. The architectural heritage of Ireland is basically broken into 2 parts. The first part is buildings built before the year 1700, and they're considered archaeology, and they're covered by the National Monuments Acts. And then buildings built after 1700 are considered architectural heritage, and they're covered by the Planning and Development Acts. So if you have a building that you want to repair or conserve, and it's built before 1700, then you're looking at the National Monuments Act. And the permission you need for that is a 2-page document called a Section 12 notification. And if you go onto the internet and you put in Section 12 notification, National Monuments Act, the form will come up. And you fill it out and you send it into the National Monument Service here in Dublin, and they will start the ball rolling. Now, when I'm doing Section 12 notifications at the moment, I will, of course, accompany all that with numerous documents, like photographic records, method statements, architectural heritage, impact assessments, archaeological impact assessments, health and safety statements, etc., 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 and send them all in as one document. And generally, I'll get a result back, and in most cases it says, yes, that's fine, we agree, go ahead. But that's not for everyone to do. So you do need professional help for a lot of this work. Now, that's what I call the Section 12 notification. Now, it might not be a tower house, it might not be a medieval church, it might be an old country house, say built in the 1630s or whatever. No, sorry, 1730s. Then it doesn't come in under National Monuments Act, it comes in under the Planning Development Act. So in order to repair this house, what you need is a 2-page form that you fill out called a Section 57 declaration to the Planning Authority. And it's very like the notification under National Monuments, except it's under the Planning and Development Act. And basically you fill out this form and you tell them you want to repair this house, and that will start the ball rolling, but this time not with National Monuments, but with the local authority. Now, in some cases, when I was the Conservation Officer in Clare, I decided to put all the tower houses into the Planning and Development Act as well. In other words, and make them protected structures. And there was a reason why I did that. Under National Monuments Acts, there is no protection for monuments from nearby development. In other words, there's no set distance from which you can build. So you could end up with a housing estate built 30 yards away from your tower house, which I didn't think was appropriate. So I included the tower houses, all 218 of them in County Clare, under the record of protected structures. Storing a tower house in County Clare, you're going to need both documents, one going to National Monuments, Section 12, and the other going to the Planning and Development Authority, Section 57. But again, the document will also need all the other documents that I quoted. Now, if it's a major, will alter the character of the building, you may need planning permission. You may need planning permission, but the planning authority will tell you that. In the case of Risteárd Ua, when I started as a young archaeologist back in the 1980s, I was full of enthusiasm. So full of enthusiasm, in fact, that when we opened the doors to the public in July 1986, we still had to wait 3 months to get planning permission. So they couldn't keep up with us, the planning office or the National Monuments. So when I did become employed by Clare County Council, a lot of people said that I was a poacher come change to gamekeeper, or poacher come gamekeeper. But from the point of view of legislation, that's basically what I'm talking about. Archaeology is Section 12, National Monuments, and architectural heritage is Section 57, Planning and Development Act. Now, and that's about all I can say about that. They will expect a lot of other documents to accompany it. So if you are considering repairing a historic building, now is the time to start gathering information. History, folklore, mythology, anything to do with the building, records, surveys. Now is the time to start gathering it. But it can be done. Now, There's also buildings that are in architectural conservation areas. They're usually towns and cities. You might have a tower house in the street, in the main street of like RD County Louth or Kilmallock, County Limerick, places like that, where you do have tower houses in the street remaining. But generally, it's not applicable to most people. One that I recently project managed for Clare County Council was Clonrush, yes, Clonrush, County Clare, and Luke is very familiar with that. It was an old medieval church that was actually being pulled down by ivy. And ivy is the greatest curse to a lot of buildings. And no doubt many of the clans will have bits of tower houses and bits of parish churches that are covered with ivy. And if something isn't done, it is going to pull them down. Now, myself and my colleague Martin Breen, we surveyed all the tower houses of Clare back in the 1990s for the Office of Public Works. And since we finished our survey, 6 tower houses have fallen down and just ended up as a pile of stones in a field. And we've been upstairs in all of them, and we have photographs and surveys and measurements done of all of them, but they just ended up as a pile of stones. And very often that is caused by ivy. It just eats away at the mortar, and because of the power of the ivy itself, it will burst walls and burst stones. So something has to be done. Now, it doesn't mean you can just go out there with a slash hook and a chainsaw and start cutting, because if you do, you may do more damage than good. What I generally recommend to people is cut the ivy within 6 inches of the wall. Don't kill it. Don't kill it. Shave it back until you can get a view of the wall and you see what damage is doing. At that stage, then you get in your conservation archaeologist or conservation architect or conservation engineer to have a look at the building and see if it's safe to take the ivy. You do 2 or 3 meters at a time, and then you repoint it with hydraulic lime, a mortar of hydraulic lime. And then when that is set, you start with the next 3 meters and you work around the building that way. But you have to be very careful not to damage the building. This is the gate going into Clonrush, which was a monastery, the site of Loch Derrig in County Clare. And we finished that there 2 years ago. I had to do a drawing showing the Board of Works exactly what we were going to do with the gate. And you can see the different color. The brown stone there is just showing them that we intend rebuilding some of it in order to maintain the structural integrity of the gateway itself. This is the old church in Clonrush. Now, it looks very white because we have new lime put into the repointing the walls. Of course, repointing is a very modern thing. There was no such thing as repointing back in medieval times, because what they did in medieval times was they plastered the walls. And it's another thing we don't often realize is that all tower houses, churches, castles, cathedrals, whatever you like, they were all plastered inside and out. They were all white when they were finished. And if you don't maintain lime off eventually, and by maintaining it, you have to give it every few years of lime wash, but it has to be hydraulic lime wash, not hydrated lime wash. There's a huge difference. So you have to learn about your lime. But once it's no longer maintained, the lime building, and people say, but isn't the stone lovely looking? It is lovely looking, but you can't keep water out of a stone building. Unless of course it's built with ashlar stone blocks, which these are not. These are all rubble buildings. When we finished up the job in Clonrush, then we erected an information sign with the history and information we had about the little monastery of Clonrush. Talking about Ivy, this is another church near me in Corofin, County Clare. It's called Coed Graveyard and Coed Church. And as you can see from the photograph again, that's about 10 years ago. It was totally overcome by ivy, and ivy was about to pull down the belfry and about to pull down some of the walls. So what we did, we shaved the ivy back, examined the walls, realized that there was no serious impact on the building, and so it was safe to kill the ivy by cutting it at the base and waiting for a few months and then pulling it down. So this is what it looks like now. And it's a very fine church, almost perfect. almost perfect. Repaired in the 1640s by Máire Rua O'Brien, who lived in Lemina Castle. There was a huge amount of work done in the 1640s in most of Ireland, most of Catholic Ireland, because at that period the English were confined to a very small area around Dublin, and Ireland was governed from Kilkenny, the Confederation of Kilkenny, and there was a huge amount of enthusiasm and confidence in the new Irish government. It was made up of the Gaelic clans and the Anglo-Norman clans, and there was so much confidence. A lot of the abbeys and monasteries were repaired. A lot of medieval churches that had been unroofed during Henry VIII's time were repaired. A lot of new tombs were put up, and you'll find most of the tombs to the Gaelic clans that you find in the west of Ireland are from the 1640s. But again, 1649, Cromwell arrived in Ringsend, and that put an end to everything again. Now, this is, I was warned that I have to talk about this building. This is St. Flannan's in Killaloe. I've been involved with the Select Vestry here for the last 5 years in Killaloe, and we're represented here by Deborah Dudgeon, who has kindly come along to make sure I do mention Killaloe today. And we've been very successful, and we've managed to raise almost 400,000 euros from grants for the repair of this building. We just finished the tower, and now we're moving down to the west gable and various other parts of the cathedral. But it's unique. It's an early 13th century, built around 1205, 1210, by Brian Barua's grandson, started by Donald Moore O'Brien and finished by Donncha Carblock. And it's one of the few Gaelic cathedrals in Ireland or Scotland still used for public worship. So from that point of view, it is very important. So Deborah asked me to mention if there's any very wealthy people here who like cathedrals, to make sure to contribute. But the reason I put this up really is to talk about the grant system. Now, as I said, we raised almost 400,000 in the last 5 years, and we hope to continue raising money for it. And it's under the various grant schemes. And there are grant schemes out there. And if you can show that you're serious and you're professional, and you apply for grants for these buildings, you will get them. I have a list of some of the grants here. We have the Built Heritage Investment Scheme, BHIS, run by all the local authorities, and it's generally 20,000, I think, is the maximum grant. But it will start the ball rolling for many people, and it will do repairs to buildings. Now, when I talk about repairs to buildings, I would talk about 3 categories. The first category is taking the ivy off a building and making sure that the ivy is not going to damage it. That's category 1. Category 2 is conservation. And conservation is basically conserving the ruin of a building as it is, not making any changes to it, but just ensuring that it's going to be there in another century or 2. And that requires repointing the stonework and consolidating the tops of walls. And you have to know about lime there, and there's hydraulic limes, and there's 3.5 strengths and 5 strengths and 2.1 strengths and various things. But once you become familiar with lime, it's a wonderful material, and that's what's used basically for conservation. And the third system, or the third thing then, is restoration. And restoration basically means you want to restore it to what it looked like when it was new. These are rare. Restorations are rare. As I say, Dyson O'D was a restoration, but they don't happen that often. But nevertheless, they're worth thinking about. And if you can show some evidence that the building looked like what you intended to look like, you will generally get a positive feeling from National Monument Service. But you have to be able to show that it looked like that one time, and you have to be able to produce some evidence. Generally, the powers that be are in favor of conservation, conserving ruins, but you'll have to make a case if you want to restore. Now, the first grant scheme I spoke about there was the Built Heritage Investment Scheme, BHIS, As I say, maximum grant is around 20,000 a year. The next one is the Historic Structures Fund, and this is the one we've used for the cathedral because the grants are very big. They can be up to 200,000 a year, but they have to be very important buildings. Um, and I think it's only 1 or 2 per local authority funded each year. Then you have the various Heritage Council grants, and they do change from year to year. Sometimes they're for vernacular buildings, and I think Dr. Moss spoke earlier about mud wall buildings that were very often the houses of people in medieval times. They're not very common in the west of Ireland because they don't last. But in the east of Ireland and all over England and Wales, they are quite common today. In fact, down in Wexford, you have a Mayglass 2-story farmhouse built in the early 1700s out of mud and being restored by the Heritage Council. So those are vernacular, the vernacular grants go for those. Then you have the community grant schemes that come out every year, again around October. Nearly all the grants are advertised October and November. And it's worth checking the websites of the Department of Housing, Arts and Heritage or the local authority county council websites to see what grants are available. Then you have the Community Monument Scheme, Community Monument Grants, where you decide to work with the Office of Public Works to repair a monument in your area. It might be, as I say, the ruins of a tower house, the ruins of a church. It might be cleaning up vegetation around a megalithic tomb. It can be anything. But you basically work hand in hand with the Office of Public Works. They'll provide the professional advice and you provide the labour. And that works very well as well. Some local authorities provide different grant schemes, sometimes for repairing houses in towns and villages, architectural conservation areas, sometimes vernacular buildings, sometimes historic buildings. It changes every year. Rural community grants is another one that comes from the departments of Housing, Heritage and Culture. IGS, that's the Irish Georgian Society. They provide small grants every year for repairing historic buildings. They don't have to be Georgian houses, but generally they are. And then you have SPAB Ireland volunteer projects. SPAB is the Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings. It was started in England in the 1870s, but the Irish branch was founded about 15 years ago. And every year they take on 1 or 2 projects. Now, I made great use of them back in 2018 for Uncowl War outside Corofin. Uncowl War means the Great Ruin. And the Great Ruin is a plantation, a big plantation fort, a big square plantation fort, probably the only one in Munster, built in County Clare. Very high walls, like the bawn of a castle, but without the castle, or the bawn of a tower house without the tower house. And we decided we would ask SPAB for some help so as we could repair the walls. So we set up a project, a training project for the preparation and use of hydraulic lime. It grew from one stage to another and got bigger and bigger. And eventually it was for a weekend. We had 74 people signed in for it. And they made a huge difference to the whole area, the whole village of Corofin. They filled the pubs, the restaurants, even provided we had to provide entertainment and music. And it was a wonderful thing. And we got a huge amount of work done over the weekend by just using these volunteers from SPAB. And SPAB will also help you to set up your own training projects if you want to supervised by a professional. And there are professionals out there who do nothing but just provide training courses and well worth talking to. So that's basically the basis of what I'm going to say. I don't know if I have another slide. Oh, I have, yeah. Down there, if anyone wants my email, it's very simple. It's dick@gmail.com. And there's my phone number. The other thing I was going to say to you, I wrote a book on the ODs. It went to print twice. If there's anyone interested in the book on any clan, it talks about the medieval history of of the ODs in Dysart, but it also talks about how we went about restoring the castle and setting up the OD clan. So if anybody wants a copy of the book, all you have to do is send me an email. All you have to say is one word, book, and I'll send you at no cost to you or no cost. By all means, do that. And my phone number is there. The picture is me beside the last chisel mark I put on Dysart Castle, which was the mason's mark. And I think every mason is entitled to his mark when he finished the job. But I had more hair that time. So that's basically it. Got a meal of Mahigov. Thank you.